The Black Experience in Arkansas, as elsewhere in America, a chronicle of slavery and the subsequent struggle for equality. 2 centuries after the first African Americans were brought to the Arkansas Territory, how much progress? How to address the continuing gaps in income, opportunity, and advancement. For this edition of Arkansas Week, it's Black History Month. What it means for the now and the tomorrow. And we'll begin in a moment.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. Not just in our state, but across the nation, it's Black History Month. Its forerunner, almost a century ago, was Black History Week. 5 decades ago, President Gerald Ford agreed that 1 week a year was insufficient to the task, so he tacked on another 3. There are celebrations, observances, justly, but it's also a time for assessment. And to do that, with a focus on Arkansas, we're joined by 4 individuals with excellent vision. Dr. Sybil Hampton retired after a career in higher education and a decade as president of the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation. Dr. Jesse Hargrove is a professor at Philander Smith College at Little Rock, serves as well on the Arkansas Black History Commission. LaShannon Spencer is CEO of the nonprofit Community Health Centers of Arkansas, and the Honorable Wiley Branton Jr. is a judge of the 6th Circuit and the son of an American legal and civil rights legend. To our panel, thank you all very much for being a part of the program. For being the program, actually. Dr. Hampton, Beauty Before Age, we'll begin with you. What was thought of as movement days, is there a new movement now, or is a new movement needed? Has it just shape-shifted?
I am thunderstruck by where we are now and so concerned that we need a new movement, that we need to have, particularly among our young people, this sense of we can make a difference and we must work in conjunction with those older heads to figure it out.
Well, is that sense, you're suggesting that sense is absent from the younger generation?
I'm not aware in my life here in Little Rock and here in Arkansas of the type of movement. Certainly we see young people doing very important things. We have a young mayor in Little Rock and we have people who are part of his team, but I'm thinking of that larger community-based type of conversation and awareness that communities need to be mobilized.
What happened, Doctor? Why is it not there? What's the missing spark or the fuel?
I only can guess, and I think the guess was that we didn't realize that the journey toward equality was a million-mile, perhaps million-year journey. And we may have thought that we were closer than we actually are now, and so that we stop doing the kinds of things in the community to build the awareness that makes it possible to then move and act and speak out.
What's the source of that, though? A frustration, an anger, the dream denied, or among the younger generation?
Perhaps the younger generation is stunned and stunted. And millennials are different, but I think that young people were on the verge of having these wonderful lives that they came to expect in a very different way than I did, because I was a part of the Jim Crow era. And I was questing for something, and young people, I think, may have felt that they were almost there. And then there are other young people, and I know this, Steve, who believe that it can't be accomplished. There are a number of young people who are very depressed, who are disappointed, and who don't have hopes and dreams about the possibility of America fulfilling its promises for African Americans.
Dr. Hargrove, you work every day with young, mostly African American university students. Do you see that deficit?
I see optimism for the Deuce Millennium generation. The DMG is a part of that group born 1997 and started school with the new millennium in 2001. The first wave graduated in 2015 and then went on to college and graduated 2019, just last year. That generation, last student, will finish in the year 33. They will be about 34 years old. And then we're going to start a Deuce Millennium 2, which will go another 30 plus years. And when you look at the teachers, I worked in teacher education at Philander Smith College and was part of that trained teachers, and became the state president of all 18 teacher training institutions. We were training those teachers to understand the importance of what skills the students needed to graduate. And we found that there were achievement gaps among that generation. And our goal became to close those achievement gaps so that it can be a better student who can understand what democracy is really about. And civic engagement and civic responsibility is what we tried to instill into that generation. We find that throughout the nation, as well as in our state of Arkansas, they are beginning to get involved whenever there's a social justice or issue that they feel that has been a wrong situation. They organize through the social media. We used to walk in the streets. Now the young people educate themselves with Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat.
God save us.
Yes.
Go ahead.
And so it's a matter of organizing differently, but still focus on what they view as important. And that's basically why I'm optimistic about this new generation.
You share that optimism, Dr. Spencer?
I do. But Steve, I wouldn't be here sitting and having the role that I have if it wasn't for the three that's sitting on this panel with me today. I think about the spark that they had together collectively. And as you heard from both doctors, they talked about, or they used plural, we. They didn't use I as singular, but they used plural together, mean together collectively. And I think sometimes in Dr. Hampton, she talked about that million-mile journey. I think some within my generation have stopped and rested during that journey.
Why? Why rest? Satisfied or in a false sense? Or
satisfied in a false sense that I have.
Satisfied or frustrated? Let me put it that
way.
A
combination of both. But going back to that million-mile journey, and it's going back to, you heard them use the word plural, together, we, collectively. And I would say for my generation that's 45 to 55, we've paused. And our eyes are just beginning to open because of what's going on across the world and even policies on a national level. He talked about that generation that's using Twitter, Facebook. That wasn't necessarily my generation. During my generation, it was big to be a part of that Facebook movement. We were still accustomed to getting newspapers every day, having 2 different newspapers within our city, and watching real news on television and not from the tweet, and reading long, very detailed, descriptive news instead of 3 to 4 sentences, which is what kids are reading today.
Bothers you. I have the suspicion it bothers everybody on this panel. Your moderator confesses it bothers him to see kids thinking with their thumbs as opposed to, or they seem to be anyway.
And I agree. And he talked about that academic gap. That's going to be a part of that academic gap because kids are not learning how to actually write that scientific, that APA, that MLA, just having that skill set and how to write correctly because of the jargon that they're using with such small words through the texting.
Judge Branton, where are you?
So, I would
using my thumbs there.
I would consider myself sort of an old school person. I grew up during the civil rights movement, and what I've observed from where I sit now is all the time I grew up, there was some unity among black people. We were all doing it for the cause, and it didn't really matter what your station was in life. We were all suppressed. When I was born in 1951, basically all people, black people, were suppressed across the United States. But with the advancements that have been made in the civil rights movement, we now have, you can go to any school, you can have achieve in the corporate world. We have black attorneys who represent corporations. We had President Obama, and we've made tremendous progress. So some of the things that were blocks to black people when I was a child no longer exist. But I think as a consequence of that, we have lost our sense of unity and sort of fighting for everybody. So because if I can make it on my own merit, maybe I'm not as concerned about people who don't have it as well as I do. So I think that's kind of what we've, in one sense, we've been, we're failing from our success in terms of a group cohesion. So in looking out sort of towards the future, I think we're at a tremendous crossroads in America right now in terms of which direction we're going to take. This, of course, you mentioned earlier that this is a presidential election year. There's a lot on the table with America right now, and that is what kind of America are we going to be? As a new grandparent, I'm worried about the future that my grandbaby's gonna have. I'm concerned, you know, we've lost manufacturing jobs. I guess the big thing is, if I can hone it down, the middle class that existed in the 60s and the 70s, that's a standard that's hard to achieve now. And we're having this gap between those who are very successful and those who can barely make it. The wealth gap is increasing. And I wonder and it's not really just for black America that I'm talking about all of America.
Biracial.
Multiracial. Where are we headed? What kind of futures can our children and our grandchildren have? And I'm very concerned that we're at a major crossroads in this nation. And since we are in an election year, if I could sort of get this point in, I think it's awfully important for people who are registered to vote to get out there and vote. First of all, become informed voters, because there's a lot of misinformation out there, and people need to educate themselves on the issues and the candidates, and then they need to get out to vote. And I would say that in the entirety of America, not just black America, but it's awfully important that we get politically engaged, which is something that I think we've been missing in the United States for a number of years, that people just don't take seriously enough their right to vote, and for the minority communities, the hard-fought right to vote. And as a consequence, we may have leaders that may not necessarily represent our best interests. And I'm not going to get partisan, because as a judge I can't recommend that, but I can recommend that people become informed voters and that they vote.
I was sitting here thinking, Your Honor, that perhaps there would be a substantial part of the black audience who would think you're a Pollyanna. There are still institutional barriers to African American and now Latino achievement as well that still have to be overcome. All four of you are superbly educated individuals, and I have to believe that that's where you're going to tell young kids, put that thing down, read a book. It's cool to do well in school, Dr. Hampton.
I absolutely would say that the thing that has disappointed me most is to run into young people who don't have the passion for education that I think we had, and who really believe that education requires a sacrifice that doesn't have anything at the end of it for them. And so my concern is that I believe that here in this state, our young people have to believe that they matter. And one of the ways that they will learn that they matter is that we make the investments in young people that are missing. I don't think that young people in communities have places to go to do. Our young people don't have places to go to do and to learn to be like Girl Scouts, Y-Teens, all the kinds of things that we had growing up. Nor do they have schools, I think, in which the schools really help them to understand that they matter and that their learning will make a difference in what America is going to be.
Anyone?
I definitely agree. Because as she was talking, she said, Y-Teens made me think about Sadie Hawkins' dance. And so it also then made me think about home economics or just basic classes that were once a part of that core curriculum. Not only girls took, but boys just as well. And so understanding the significance in education, but I go back to how fortunate I am. And when you think about these three that are sitting at the table, they knew it was important to have a vision to spark life, to spark that intellectual knowledge into others. I always grew up, they used to say, read a book, because information is actually hidden in a book. And how many kids today understand the importance of actually reading a book and learning the vocabulary words that are often in that book that they may not understand, but if they don't understand it, how to read it, but to write it down on a piece of paper so they can go and understand it, the prefix and the suffix, and understand that meaning. That comes back to family. And sometimes we cannot blame institutions or communities if that foundation is not at home. Years ago, we had a sense of community. If you didn't get it in your home, you got it in Ms. Jones, you got it in Judge Wiley Brenn's home. It was a sense of community and sense of pride.
And that, just sort of to touch on that, one of the things that's really changed is we have this thing called social media. When I grew up as a child, we had ABC, NBC, and CBS, and that's if the rabbit ears worked correctly. You had your church, and you had your school, and you had your parents, and those were the influences on you. But now with the social media, our kids are getting unfiltered messages that we don't really control unless I guess a few parents will step in and control the message. But our kids are learning things, and they're taking on cultural values that don't emanate from a church, they don't emanate from the parents, that this social media, who knows where it comes from. And I think that's really having a negative impact, not only on our children, but on our adults. I mean, one of the problems that I'm concerned about America now in general is that, people can choose what facts they want to believe. Well, when I grew up, facts were facts and other things were not. You didn't have multiple versions of the facts, but you can go on social media and you can find anything that will support what it is you want to believe as opposed to what the reality is. But getting back to the kids, one of the other economic challenges that lays ahead is you used to be able to plan for a career, and if you hooked up with the company, you could be there and make it to retirement. That's not the reality now. Businesses that I never thought would close down have closed down. You can be in a career and all of a sudden something will change and you become obsolete. And I think one of the challenges for us as a society and for our children is to figure out what kind of jobs are going to be out there 10 or 15 years from now. How do you get trained or prepared for those? And with the loss of so many manufacturing jobs, which used to be good paying jobs that would support a good quality of living for a middle class, with the disappearance of those, and I don't know how those actually get replaced, I think we have some real economic challenges ahead and how to keep our population, and again, I'm talking about across the board. I'm talking about white folks, brown folks, everybody. How does everybody get a meaningful job that's going to provide a decent standard of living, and how can we maintain that? That's really one of the fundamental challenges facing America as we go into the future.
You are entitled to your own opinion, but not to your own facts, said Mr. Moynihan, who 50 years ago warned of a deterioration, a breakdown in the African American family and the deleterious impact it was likely to have on generations ahead. Not that white America need necessarily brag about its out-of-wedlock birth rate, which is substantial, but how big a roadblock was Mr. Moynihan right? In other words, the breakdown in the family.
Let me say,
Doctor, go ahead.
You mentioned that Moynihan report, and that Moynihan report of '69 began to say that we were moving toward two different societies, one black and one white. And the reason why that report was able to point that out was due to the fact that there was local control. And you've heard the judge talk about there's a disconnect. If you go back to schools, they were locally controlled with local school boards, and teachers were in place of the parents in locus parentis. You don't have in locus parentis guiding the schools as during our generation. So now a student goes to a school that is no longer in his or her community. And so there's not, you could go next door, the person who owned the supermarket, your parents knew, of course the barber, the person knew, and different things. Now communities are not such as that simple. So now we gotta find a way to get local back into the schools. We're building a new school right here in our city of Little Rock. And how do you get that new school, which is on the skirts, buy-in from the community so that people will feel the need to work with the young people in the form of tutoring, mentoring, advising, so that they gain a sense of belonging? Because right now students don't have a sense of belonging because they see a lot of division.
Dr. Hampton?
I actually want to say that one of the things that I want to say to our young people is that you don't have to be an icon to matter. I really believe that that's something else that's happened that we've been really talking about. That when we came up, we felt that little people, that just doing your best for the community, for your race, was very important. And now I think that young people are overwhelmed by this whole notion of icons, and people want to be stars. And so if that's not really close to you in reality, you kind of are floating around and not really putting down roots and having any wings. And I think that we all are examples of people who we weren't stars. We were ordinary members of our community who believed that we might be able to do something, and maybe we turned out to be extraordinary, but it's not because we were born extraordinary. It's because we did the hard work and we believed that we mattered. And I want our young people to know that they matter, and they can make a difference.
Let me address this issue of breakdown in the family, because that suggests that black folks sort of are at fault for the breakdown of the family. And I want to be clear that historically the black family has been under attack by racist and discriminatory policies. It started with snatching families out of Africa and enslaving people, separating them, sending them off to different plantations, and it has actually continued to this day. I mean, because once we got rid of slavery, there was still Jim Crow segregation. We were denied economic opportunities. We were denied jobs. We were denied the right to vote. We were denied the right to hold office. And even though we've overcome many of those things, those have a lasting legacy that still fundamentally affects the black community. One of the things that's amazing, really, if you kind of look at it in a different way, is that we had families that were able to overcome that and actually put us in a good position. So I agree that that there are issues with the breakdown of the family, but I don't want to miss how that came to be and what's to blame for that. And that really is racism and discriminatory policies practiced by, I guess in one sense, our economy, our government, and the majority control in society. And I think we can ever lose sight of that, because I still think America owes black folks, I guess we put the Indian folks in there as well, they still owe something to these people to sort of undo some of the significant past injustices and past harms that were done to our community.
We are out of time for our over-the-air version of this broadcast, but, and I'm just now informing the control room of this, we would like to continue this conversation. It's too good to quit. We'd like to continue this conversation in our web-based version, add a few minutes to the program if everyone can stay tuned. In the meantime, we thank you very much for tuning in to this over-the-air version, and we'll see you next week for Arkansas Week on Arkansas PBS.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.